Hi everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the new Nova LGBTQI Plus Club podcast called Color Coded. I'm Emery, your host for today, and I'm here with two very special guests, Eros and Diana. Guys, say hi.
Hi there.
Hi there.
Today we're making an episode to honor Trans Day of Remembrance, which is from the words of Gwendolyn Ann Smith, who was the person who decided to create this day. Trans Day of Remembrance seeks to highlight the losses we've faced due to anti-trans bigotry and violence. I am no stranger to the need to fight for our rights, and the right to simply exist is first and foremost. With so many seeking to erase transgender people, sometimes in the most brutal ways possible, it is vitally important that those we lost are remembered, and that we continue to fight for justice. So again, these are the words from Gwendolyn Ann Smith, who created Trans Day of Remembrance because she lost a dear friend of hers who was brutally, violently killed, and who is also transgender, a woman, Rita Hester. So we're here today to create a podcast to talk about our narrative as trans people. But I do want to start this podcast off by saying that we're not here today to harp on the violence and the pain of our experiences. For us, Trans Day of Remembrance is an opportunity to celebrate what we have overcome, to celebrate who we are, and to celebrate what it is to be trans and to be surviving and to be alive, especially given the violent nature of the history of our community and the violence that we've received. So that's enough for me. I'd love for my guests to talk a little bit about themselves, their identities, and why they're here today to speak about themselves.
Hi there. My name is Diana. I'm 25 years old. I'm a trans woman, and I go by she, her pronouns. So I came from Algarve originally. A little backstory about me, guys. And I've decided to move to Lisbon a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 more or less, because Lisbon is a place which has much more resources for trans people to start transitioning, get their support. It's also a bigger city in comparison to where I come from, so it makes it much easier to also create a bigger network to connect with new people and not feel so isolated.
Hello, I'm Eros. I'm 26 years old. I also came from Algarve, but I am Brazilian. I live in Portugal for 17 years. When I first came to Lisbon, I didn't come with the purpose to start transitioning. I just figured out myself later, 2-3 years later. And it is I think it happened mostly because I felt comfortable and I felt like I was more independent from my parents. I was paying my own bills. I had my own job. I had my own place, shared like a room, the expensive rooms of Lisbon. But yeah, that was a beginning. I could start looking more at myself, and that's when I found out a lot of stuff that was hidden.
I love that. I think that this sort of idea of independence and coming into our own and the idea of self-discovery is really pertinent to many trans experiences across different spaces. For me, my journey started in the US, and I think something that was so pertinent for me, or what I realized in my decision to transition, was it was so important to see other trans people that were successful, and I think that word success is complex and it comes out in many different ways. But personally, I started to realize that I could transition and I could be trans when I started to see other people in the world living their lives and just doing the damn thing. I think growing up, my only sort of awareness or whatever of transness was through the media, like mainstream media, which often is quite violent towards trans people and a very uncomplex way of sort of representing what our lives are like. And then I met trans people who were like my teachers, or who were just like what I would call quote unquote average individuals. And I'm like, holy crap, maybe I can actually do that, because that's something in my wheelhouse. Did you guys have that experience too? What was it like? What kind of role models or models of transness did you see growing up, and how did that influence your transition?
So quite honestly, when I was younger, before I figured it all out, I'm still figuring it out though. I never had like big role models in regards to like trans women. I usually would just see myself represented in porn culture, which is quite limiting. Quite honestly, it's we can all imagine the misogyny that goes there, the transphobia that goes there.
Absolutely.
However, as I grew up and the trans issue got, the trans theme got bigger and bigger, I started seeing myself in movies. When I started seeing the movies and I started seeing like, listen, I actually have trans people who appear on TV shows and they're just not doing like the thing that we all know about. And that helped me quite a bit. I started also using YouTube quite a lot, starting seeing like people on YouTube saying, listen, I was able to take the hormones 2 years down the road and like I feel amazing now. Like I'm a teacher, I'm just your average car cleaner, and I'm really freaking happy because like, look at me, I can do this. YouTube was actually like the biggest help here, because individuals were taking their time to record themselves, just saying, hey, just I can do this. I'm just living a normal life. Does it have its issues? Yes, but I mean that goes for everyone, quite honestly. And yeah, but this is basically to sum up. I think that it started out with a really bad representation because I had nowhere else to go. But then YouTube, the media started showing up. People started showing up a little bit more. And that was like heaven to me, quite honestly. Thank you so much.
It's pretty much the same. At first, I've never seen a trans man before. And then I just came to Lisbon and I met trans people with normal lives, being themselves, you know. And I was never able to see that. In the other city I used to live, I was never able to see that much in television shows. Like, I'm Brazilian, and in Brazil you have a lot of violence against trans people, a lot of transphobia. I mean, you have it everywhere, but I always had a bad image of being a trans person, and I was afraid of it, and so I denied it until I could see somebody who's a trans person that is like living a normal life, and they don't have like to suffer or never get a job or never get to be successful and make their dreams come true, you know. It is possible. I'm starting to see trans people everywhere. We are appearing. We must appear. We must do what we have to do, what we dream. We have dreams. We are not just people who live like, I'm not just a trans man. I'm a person, you know. I'm a person in the first place, and I have dreams. I have goals in life. I want to buy a caravan and travel across the world, you know. I think what we need is really to normalize our existence.
I think that's so beautifully said, Eros, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, I think one of the things when you say that, what it makes me think of is like, even in the positive realm of when people view transition, I'll just take my own experience as an example. Like, you know, I have a good relationship with my mum. It was obviously a relationship that evolved through my transition, and it had its ups and downs. But one of the things she would say to me is, "You're so brave. You're so brave for taking up this space. You're so brave for doing this." And I think it's a really interesting dichotomy, because when you say I'm brave, it's why do I need to take up that space of bravery? Why are you seeing it as a brave act? Is it because of the violence that we've incurred as a community in the past? Definitely. But I think what's dangerous about saying that we're brave is that you're still dehumanizing us, right? You're making us seem like bigger than human. And that's still a force of dehumanization, and dehumanization has been at the root of the violence that's been caused against us. So I love what you're talking about in terms of having a normal life, a normal existence. We just want to be perceived in a sort of normal way as a way to be human. And so I talked about my relationship with my mum, and you know, one of the things that I really treasure about transition, one of the things I was gifted, I feel like, was a more authentic connection with the people around me. Don't get me wrong, I think that, you know, there was definitely people lost when I decided to transition and went through with it. But I've noticed overall that the connections that I've made with the people around me have felt more genuine. And I think that's just because, you know, I'm operating in the world in a more genuine way. Have you guys noticed that as well? Or what's been your experience with your relationships through transition?
Personally speaking, in regards to my relationship, so family-wise, it was a complete mess because I lost connection with all of my family, except for my mother, which is still a work in progress. She's taking her time, I'm taking my time. But anyways, in regards to my other relationships, so friendships, love interests, whatever else, everything feels indeed more authentic because I feel better with myself. I feel more in tune with my body, with my needs, with my everything. I feel more present, and that really shows that. And the connections that I create, I can be myself more easily. I feel freer. I feel much better, and that's really something that really helps out in creating connections, honest connections. Everything just flows better. It just feels like correct in a way. That's more or less how I experienced relationships.
Yes, I think my relationship with my friends got better. Of course, it was like sort of a filter. It made me look at the relationships I was having at the time, and as far as I'm being myself, people who love me will be right next to me. Even if I'm whatever, it doesn't mean if I'm a trans person, whatever I am, those people were there to support me and help me go through hard times I had with my parents, with my family. For me, it was the hardest thing to do, to come out, because my family is very religious, very conservative family. But I told them the truth. Look, this is who I am. I cannot pretend anymore. I'm not here to fulfill your expectations, so I'm your child. Do whatever you want with it, but I'm going to be myself. I can no longer stand trying to fit in those standards that you set to me. And at first I thought it would be so much worse, like the experience of telling my family and everything. But then things take time, of course. My family, they love me and they want to be right there to me, even though they don't agree with my path, with the way I am, but still they don't want to be distance. They don't want to be away from my life. So my mother always tried to talk to me. I gave her some time to process. We are like giving a little time so she can feel more comfortable. I can feel more comfortable, and even like with the other family I have, like in Brazil, I found out that it was a lot of people supporting me, like people that I never imagined they would accept, they would understand, or it's not like they understand, but they respect that. And now I have a different vision. I was so scared. I was scared in a point that I started to think, oh, okay, I wanted to visit my family in Brazil, but now I don't know if I'll be comfortable to go back there. But then time has passed, and I found out that people still care, and yes, I feel more comfortable about it now. Like, I think when you feel comfortable with yourself, it's contagious. People can see it, they also will. It will be like it's normalizing. It's people. Okay, he's not an alien. He's a trans man, not an alien. He's a person. And that's not a big deal at all.
I really appreciate you putting it into words like that. I think that's so true. One of the things that I think I had this preconceived notion before transitioning and when sort of negotiating my trans identity, that this was going to be a really isolating life path, that I would feel so alone, that I would feel invisible in the world. And I think what's so interesting about what you're saying as well, it's like once you take the plunge and you do what you got to do, you actually realize that your world opens up in ways that you didn't even know possible, right? And the people that you think you were going to leave behind actually turn out to surprise you a lot of the time. And obviously that's not everyone, and I think we can all tell a story or two about heartache and loss that we've all experienced. But I think that's really interesting when people talk about this idea of chosen family, right? And I understand the concept. It's like you're choosing who it is that you're going to have in your corner. But for me, it was like hardly chosen. To be honest, it was the people who showed up for me that became my family. It was not a chosen thing. It was like people who were there. And I think that's a really, really awesome ability or like privilege to have as a trans person. One of the things that I'm really interested in hearing both of your perspectives about, it's an experience that I sort of was surprised about in my own transition, but it was the realities of gendered experience. And one of the things that I kind of realized through transition is that, being perceived as female and being perceived as male is two very different scenarios and two very different experiences. And from my perspective, moving from a space of female to male, I noticed that I moved into a place of privilege, that I moved into a place of feeling like my voice was heard, that I was taken seriously more often, that I could feel safe in spaces that I'd never felt safe before, to be honest. And I would love to hear both of your perspectives on that experience, if it was just me or if that's a universal thing.
Well, let me tell you something. It's quite the opposite for me because before I was perceived as a boy, and let's just say that I never really had it easy in a way because as a boy I was also perceived as very feminine. So in a way I had some privilege, but at the same time it was a wibbly wobbly thing. There was some discrimination, but for example, I'll use like a silly example, but it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. For example, when I was younger, perceived as a boy, I could walk down the streets at night, headphones on, I could turn on the music, just be there. 3 a.m, wanted to go out, perfect, I'll just go. Now that I'm perceived as female, that's a completely different story. Going out at night is not so fun anymore, I'll tell you that. The way that I am perceived, I went down from a place where I was in a way respected, listened to, because that's one of the biggest differences I've also noticed, because whatever they perceived me as, they saw me as a man in a way, and I could speak without being interrupted. I could be perceived as intelligent in a way. Now that I've transitioned, for example, a workplace, I cannot finish a sentence sometimes because I'm always interrupted. They keep on talking over. I had moments where I had to literally ask, can you please just let me finish what I'm saying? And also, we all know this term, mansplaining, not fun. It's a really complex experience to sum up in words, but indeed, like going from a place of privilege, let's say it, down to a place where I'm perceived as inferior or less than, It was quite shocking, honestly. When I started the transition, when I started being perceived as female, let's put it that way, it was quite shocking. I didn't know how to deal with it initially. Being like harassed in the streets, as in, I just went out and had guys catcalling me. Never experienced that before. I took some time to adjust to that and to learn how to deal with that. It's basically from night to day. But do I feel good about myself, and am I much more able to defend myself and put myself out there? Definitely. So they ain't messing with me.
Amen. Amen.
My experience is alike Emery's, because as before, when I was seen as a girl, I went through all the harassment, all the interruption, all the experiences women go through. And since I started, things changed. Even going out at night changed for me. I feel more comfortable. I feel safer. I can walk on the streets, and I won't have any guy like harassing me or saying they saying stuff like, flirting with me all the time and seeing me as an object. That stopped right there. And I feel so bad that the world is so mean, like, to women. I'm very sad about it. It's something that concerns me, and something like, I'm real feminist, very feminist, and I don't want to, as a man, knowing how it was to be a woman, I feel like as trans men we cannot stop fighting for women's rights. You don't need to be a woman to fight for women. You don't need to be a trans person to support trans. You don't need to be LGBTQ to support them. I think that's for real.
I think you bring up such an important point there about allyship and the position of and the empower of a community that's filled with diversity inside. One of the things that I think transition offered me in terms of creating a more complex understanding of the world in my own mind was this idea of time was kind of skewed for me in a little bit. It was messed in a way that sort of liberated me, and I'm interested to hear both of your thoughts on this. But for example, we go through puberty in our 20s, right? Like if you end up going through a hormonal replacement therapy, HRT, which is considered a medical transition in our community, you end up going through basically a second puberty at whatever age you decide to do that. And so for me, that was in my early 20s. And it's both a really beautiful experience of reclaiming childhood and boyhood in my experience, but it was also... it humbles you a little bit because well, at least I had these aspirations for myself in my sort of previous life, in my female life. I had these ideas of what I wanted to achieve at a certain point. A lot of that dictated by my biological clock, right? Like I wanted to get to a point where I would be married and then have kids and have this successful career and be this badass woman. And that is all blown up through transition. And when that sort of happened, for me at least, it became a really time of insecurity because I was like, wow, I've really had these ideologies for myself, which now are no longer possible. But at the same time, it allowed me to realize that life is really what you make it. And time is not a dictator of success. It's not a dictator of anything really, unless you allow it to be. And I found that to be so liberating. And I would really love to hear both of your experiences about how has medically transitioning in the time that you've done it shaped the way you perceive the sort of the timeline of your life. What has that meant for you guys?
First of all, just a little thing that I want to put out there. Today, I think we have only binary people, so non-binary people, we see you. But in regards to my own experience with medical transitioning, well, first of all, it was crazy, quite honestly. it indeed made like a whole world of a difference. I went through my first puberty, which honestly, let's not talk about it. We'll just gloss over that. And then I started also on my early 20s, the real puberty for me. Started taking estrogen, the testosterone blockers. It was, at the beginning, it was quite honestly a really scary experience because my body was reacting to these new things. My body was feeling things differently. I was feeling lots of new emotions that I didn't know that I had before. It was crazy. Everything was just so, I felt really touchy, really also vulnerable, because you're basically like, you're just throwing away everything that you had, everything that you thought you were, throw it in the trash can and just start again. You have to once again go through discovering your body, understanding your new processes, understanding how your body works now, because I also felt like a real difference in that. Even the way that I interacted with people, it touches a little bit on the previous topic, it completely renewed itself. But although it was scary, because I'm not gonna lie, it was, at the same time, it was basically the most liberating experience I ever had, because I took I took over my life. I took control of my life, which is something that I felt I didn't have before, because I just felt my body on my first puberty just going a place where I didn't want to go. It didn't make sense to me. But now, as I started to medically transition, testosterone blockers, estrogen, I could finally take charge of my life and in my body in a way, and it just felt like, well, damn, I can do whatever I want now. I can be like that woman that I envision. I can be that person, that strong woman that I've always thought that I was, but I never really knew how to put it out. And that's basically a big sum up of what medically transition has done to me. It's like a rebirth of the personality of yourself, a rediscovering. It's, as I said, summing it up, it's scary, but I think one of the most beautiful things that you can do for yourself. It's, well, I'll quote someone who I don't remember the name, but it's a radical self-acceptance, I think, and there's nothing quite like that, quite honestly.
About my puberty, my second one. uh, I see the hormones, the treatment as a second chance to have what I really wanted to have on the first one, and then it was like was not possible at that time, because first time was kind of a mess for me, because okay, boobs are growing, this is happening, like I don't want that, stop it. I was like not comfortable. It was a time of my life that i I didn't enjoy much, like I it was really hard for me. And now in my early 20s, I'm being a teenager again. I'm being okay, but this is the happy part of being a teenager. I'm having the experience of being a teenager as an adult, having to pay my bills. Okay, it's not exactly the same, because okay, your body is going through changes, and like female to male, I don't like to use this term because I don't believe that I ever was a woman, so I don't like to use the female to male much, just so you can understand the female to male medical changes. At first, when you start taking the hormones, you look really young. You look like younger, much younger than you really are. You really look like a teenager. Absolutely. And your body really starts to react to the hormones. And then you get every day looking at the mirror, like, oh, you see hair in my face? Okay, the beard is coming. Okay, this is so exciting. And I feel so blessed that I had the opportunity to start, because taking hormones is not what makes you a trans person. Going through surgeries is not what makes you a trans person. Some people might not want to take any hormones. Some people might not want to have any surgery, not top surgery, not bottom surgery. That will not change the fact that they are trans people. That if they identify as man, as woman, as non-binary, they still are. Being trans is not a checklist. Like, people ask you a lot of questions when you start a transition. Let's talk about this. This is very important. So, Emery or Diana?
Yeah, man. I mean, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think it was, I think you sum it up really nicely in terms of thinking about what does it really mean to be trans, and who gets to define that. And to be honest, I think when I started transitioning and when I started to verbalize to people that I was transgender, a lot of the questions I received were about like, okay, so when are you going to start your hormones? What surgeries do you want? Very much a questioning down a very specific path, which made me believe that, okay, so these people only believe trans people exist like this if they medically transition, if they have all the surgeries, which basically equates to passing as cisgender, right? That's the only way you're perceived. And that's super problematic because honestly, our community is extremely diverse in the ways in which transness operates in different bodies, which makes sense, right? Every individual is an individual, so every trans individual is also going to have an individual experience. And there's a huge also political movement even that permeates within the trans community around trans medicalism, which is basically expressing that only people who medically transition are valid trans people. I don't think all three of us do not believe in that ideology at all. Happy for you guys to speak on your own, but I just think that that is a very gatekeeping way to see our community. And honestly, having access to hormone replacement therapy is a privilege in a lot of places. It is an expensive, oftentimes takes a lot of resources to be able to do, and it is a lifelong commitment. So beyond just wanting to get the hormones, actually accessing them is an issue of like beyond gender and sexuality. It's an issue of race, class, and socioeconomics. So I think it's a brilliant question that you bring up, and to sum up, I think that all trans people are valid when they self-identify as trans, and it is no one's responsibility and it is no one's prerogative to dictate or police that.
I think that's a really important topic to talk about, because this trans medicalism issue, this gatekeeping, this can be quite dangerous and this can have a really bad effect on people who are trans, identified as trans. And let's say, for example, you might have medical issues that do not allow you to go with taking hormones. You might, for example, not have the money to go ahead with it. Does that make you less valid? Absolutely not. There are many different issues that go about taking hormones. Some people just don't feel like it. Some people just don't want to take them, but they do identify as trans. So why should someone tell them, oh, you're not trans because you don't take the hormones, you don't do the procedures? There's no guidelines to be trans. If you identify as trans, you're trans. Great, good for you. Just it's very important not to feed this idea of gatekeeping, because that could also potentially be very harmful for people who are still exploring their identity. Because let's imagine someone could be thinking about exploring their identity and just seeing things like, oh, you need to take hormones to be a trans person, etc. That could take a huge toll on their mind, and they might actually stop themselves from growing and also exploring even further their identity. It's quite worrisome. I understand in a way, because cis society has these expected ways of how transition should go, and that also permeates to ourselves. We internalize that. It's something that I think it's very important to talk about, to deconstruct. And in regards to the questions, there needs to be more tact in regards to that, because talking from personal experience, as soon as someone knows I'm trans, oh, so you want to get the bottom surgery? Do you want to get the top surgery? Do you want to get whatever? Those are not questions that you would ask someone you meet on the street. Like, I would not go to a cis people. I would not go to a cis person and just ask them, oh, what do you have down there? How's it? Tell me, how's it going? Like, this is not something that you do with someone on the street. So why should you just go to a trans person and ask him, listen, honey, what's going down there? You don't do that. That's highly invasive. We're people. We have our boundaries. We don't deserve to have those boundaries invaded or trespassed in a way. So I think that it's important that we get more visibility, and also that we need to be represented in schools, in education, so that people can also learn that, I mean, we're just the average Joe, we're just doing our thing. The only thing that's a bit different is that we're doing some things to improve ourselves and explore ourselves further, but we don't need to have like all those parts of us exposed. We don't need to tell people about our genitalia. We don't need to tell people about what do we do, what do we want to do. That's no one's business. We don't ask that to cis people, so trans people should also not be invaded in that way.
Yes, I totally agree with all that you guys said. And I think that we agreeing with Diana, because education is very important. It's very important. People like to get in a job, they should talk about a lot of stuff, because some people don't know how to deal with a trans person. Like, they don't know how to. They look at us as we are strange or something so out of normal sometimes. Like, people need to. Companies should know how to treat their trans employees. It's important. Companies should have should from in the beginning of the transition, like when I wanted to change my name in my documents, but I still didn't have the opportunity to do that because of money reasons. Right now here in Portugal, if you are a national, you can change your name for free. That's a right I really appreciate and thank to trans people that fought for it. We got it, but some people, I was born in Brazil, so I'm still only Brazilian. I'm not a citizen, an European citizen. So it will take a little bit longer for me to change my name, but still, all my logins, all my email in the company, they did it all with my dead name. When I told them from the beginning that I'm a trans person, I'm not going to be able to change my name. So at least in my workplace, I need to feel comfortable. I mean, I will spend 40 hours a week doing this job. Okay, I understand that in the contract, okay, the name that is in the document, okay, but in some situations, internal situations, you can easily manage having the real name, the person's real, and the real name of a trans person's real name is the name they feel comfortable with. So that's another question people make a lot. What is your real name? Like, my real name is Eros. Oh, but the other name, no, this is my only name. And I think companies, even in schools, universities, we should have space to talk about it, because there's nowadays, I feel like people are starting to noticing, and there is a lot of information going on now because of the internet. Trans people coming out making YouTube channels. That helped me a lot. But still, not only on the internet, but everywhere. It's important.
Absolutely, Eros. Absolutely. You know, I think it's what you're highlighting here is like this idea of, again, bringing humanity to the trans experience. Like, it reminds me of pronouns as well, right? Like when trans people and trans in the large sense of the community, when we asked for our pronouns to be respected, what we're really asking for is to be seen and to be humanized and to be allowed to exist in a space that historically we've not been able to. And a lot of the comments that I've typically like heard around issues of pronouns or gender neutral bathrooms and things has been issues of like, why should we pander to a minority, right? Like that's the sort of the discourse that I see on the other end. And I'm interested to hear both of your thoughts on this, but you know, my position to that is, no one is liberated until we are all liberated. And if we take that into consideration, what we're asking for here is we are fighting for your liberation alongside ours, because it is not until we can all feel seen, heard, and witnessed that we are all seen, heard, and witnessed. And I think it sounds kind of like philosophical, but I think in a real world sense, it's about having the common courtesy and the common understanding that if you are not going to uplift the person next to you, then you are part of the oppression. And if you're willing to be part of the oppression, then that to me is regressive and bigotry and ignorant. And I think we're beyond that at this point. But I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on that.
Yes, sure. We must fight for each other. I think we are on the same boat. And like non-binary, trans man, trans woman, gender fluid, you know, every way of being should come together.
Picking up on what Eros was saying, I do think that inside the community sometimes we could be a bit more, we could hold more each other's hands. I think sometimes we do fight the wrong battles in between like the little niches that exist. So I do think I think it's very important that we have the gender neutral bathrooms, that we have our pronouns respected. This is something that needs to be talked about. This is something that needs to be exposed. It's important that we talk about these topics. It's important that we put this out there. It's important that we all unite and stand for each other, because if we don't stand for someone, we're letting them out. We're just repeating the cycle. We need to stand together. I think it's basically summing it up. We need to hold each other's hands. If we let someone out, we're doing it wrong.
That's a really lovely way to wrap up this episode. I thank you both so much for coming and talking with me alongside me about issues of transition and being transgender. I know it takes a lot of you know, strength to stand together and to express our story. So I really appreciate you both. The LGBTQI plus club will be hosting a gender inclusive workshop around language, around thinking about what it means in terms of allyship. And we would love for the community to show up and to be a part of the conversation as we move the conversation towards the Nova community. It's been a real privilege to be on this podcast. Just want to thank the LGBTQ plus club for having us on this podcast. And just a disclaimer, we are 3 transgender people, but all of binary experience, all medically transitioned. We do not represent the whole community. In fact, we represent a very small part. And so please, you know, for other trans people out there, we would love to hear your stories. If you want to share them with us through this platform or in other ways, keep going, and you know, love and support. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure to be here and to share a little bit of my experience and talk about those topics that I consider very, very important. And let's unite and, you know, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us today, and remember, If you're still questioning it, if you're still a bit confused about where you want to go, don't worry, it'll be fine.